your risk and sharing your savings than there is making money in markets by maximizing your production, trying to make money on diminishing margins in the volume of the units you sell. That's why I believe market capitalism will be marginal to life by the mid-decades of the 21st century. Let me give you an example of a bad network. Monsanto and Novartis, genetically modified food seeds. These are bad networks. GMO seeds, bad networks. When Monsanto and Novartis provides a patented seed to a farmer, there's no sale. There's no market. There's no seller. There's no buyer. Instead, Monsanto enters into a licensing agreement with the farmer. The farmer is given access to the intellectual property in the DNA of that patented seed for one segment of time, a growing season. Property always stays with Monsanto. The client has a license to use the intellectual property for one segment of time. The new seeds at harvest, they don't belong to the farmer. He can't use them. If he does, he can go to jail. He can be fined. Monsanto and Novartis and AstraZeneca and DuPont and Aventis, they'd rather never sell another seed again. They'd much rather every farmer in the world have to access the experience of the seed rather than pay for the physical seed itself. Imagine the power here. These companies can concentrate global power over the seed business, and every farmer and every consumer becomes totally beholden to these companies. And here's a big problem with networks. There are going to be tremendous benefits in networks and big problems. The ability to concentrate power in global networks with B2B and B2C electronic commerce is so expansive that it dwarfs the potential of concentrating power in markets when you have single companies exploiting physical goods and labor. We're going to have to rethink antitrust, because all of our antitrust statutes are based on protecting markets. But networks inherently replace markets. They're designed to destroy markets. Are they in violation of all our antitrust statutes? In Europe, you're having a big battle over AOL Time Warner, the first issue about a network e-commerce into Europe. We're going to need to be surgical. How do we assure that good networks with redeeming value are allowed to flourish? How do we ensure that bad networks with no redeeming value are not allowed to happen? We're going to have to create statutes that are sophisticated and surgical. All right. What's the biggest problem with networks? We wake up one day, all of us in this room, and what do we find? Our entire life becomes a paid-for experience. We're embedded in network after network after network, and memberships and subscriptions and retainers and leases and licensing agreements. Every relationship we have with our fellow human being becomes a commercial contract. We're connected to the sprinkler company and the automobile company and the publishing company. We're totally connected 24/7. At least in markets, you have non-commercial time. After you negotiate the exchange, you have time for family, and you have time for society and time for culture. It's not paid for. But in a network, potentially our entire day and night is embedded in commercial relationships. Can civilization survive if virtually all our relationships are commercial relationships? That's the great dream of world trade. To create a global commerce where we overcome all of our other social obligations and we have trade and commerce all the time with everybody. A noble goal, but what if we wake up one day and find out that's all we have? Commerce becomes the arbiter. Our lives become commercially contracted. To my mind, that would be the ultimate dystopian nightmare. How close are we to this? Have you visited the United States recently? When you come back from the United States, you have several observations. I know, because I'm here. I spent a lot of time with people in Europe. Here's your first observation. Everybody's overweight. That's your first observation about the United States. I know how you talk about it. They're all fat. Your second observation is it's so commercial. I can't wait to get back to Europe where not everything is commerce. Correct? More and more of our relationships in America are becoming commercial contracts with each other. That's too thin a bond to maintain society. Please understand where I'm coming from. I teach at the leading business school in the U.S., Wharton. I believe in commerce. Can't live without it. I want you to be clear. But I don't think it is sufficient to define who we are. Now, I'm going to share with you something. I have been asking CEOs in Silicon Valley and in other industries that are involved with the new technologies this question, which I think you'll find interesting. I asked them, do you feel that the quality of your family's lives are increasing in direct proportion to the technologies your companies are introducing? Fair question? What do you think every single CEO has told me? Without exception. No. They say that all the technologies they're introducing, that in their own lives, they have less time, more stress, relationships are deteriorating. Then I ask them question 2. These are CEOs. Do you see any light at the end of this high technology tunnel? They all say they're going to fall further behind, more stress, less ability to connect in a human way. These are the CEOs. We got a problem here. We are on the cusp of the greatest technology revolution in history. We are introducing all of these labor-saving, time-saving, convenience-saving technologies, and we feel we have less time than ever. We're falling behind. We're stressed. What's happening? There's a cruelty here. There's a cruelty built into the technology. You get the email in order to save time, but then everyone else plays the game. So when you leave this lecture today, you're going to have 200 emails waiting for you. Are you saving time? What happens is the technology increases the pace, the speed, the flow. You can't catch up. You all have a cell phone. So you're connected 24/7. Everyone else is playing the game. I have literally been in toilets, men's rooms, where a business person will answer the telephone on the toilet. This is not good. This is really not good. This is sad, really. We should laugh at ourselves. Does the fault lie with the technology? Probably not. Does the fault lie with this new economic system that's emerging? Probably not. The fault lies with us because we have yet to have a great debate on how to make this great technology revolution a renaissance. We have yet to find a way to make this technology an augment to our lives, but not a substitute for our existence. Instead, we're rushing to catch up with the technology, and then we get trapped. The technology is controlling us, It should be allowing us to liberate ourselves for more time, not less time. It's the whole point. So what we need is a social vision powerful enough to make this technology revolution and this commercial revolution a renaissance. We haven't done that yet. Now, in the last few minutes, I want to talk about cultural commerce. I know that this foundation is quite involved in the question of culture. How important is the cultural dynamic in people's lives? Nothing is going to challenge your institution more than the shift to cultural commerce. Does anybody know what the biggest industry in the world is? Anybody? It's the biggest industry in the world. This is an industry that didn't exist appreciably 50 years ago. Anybody know? Huh? No. It's part of it. Part of it. Drugs? Well, okay, I'm talking about legitimate industry. Travel and tourism. Here's an industry that in 7 years from now will employ 1 out of 5 human beings on this planet. And 20% of the gross domestic product in 7 years from now. That's an industry. What is travel and tourism? I was just with one of your companies here, COSA, the cruise ship company. What do they provide? What is travel and tourism? It's the ability of those who can afford to pay for the experience of enjoying someone else's culture as a commercial relationship. That's what it is. We come to Italy, we pay to be exposed to your culture. Now, please understand, my wife and I love to travel. We love to be exposed to other cultures, and we especially love Italy. It's our favorite country. But I have to tell you, I want to share something, maybe you have the same experience. When we go to other countries, especially developing countries, we're becoming uneasy. Because we notice that we're paying to be exposed to their culture. And yet the local population cannot afford access to their own culture. It's now zoned off for the wealthy travelers. The only time we ever see the local population is when they're performing for us in the travel and tourism industry. We're reaching a point in the world where part of the human population performs their deep culture for the rich and the well-off other part of the population. Travel and tourism, destination entertainment centers, theme parks, film, TV, video, sports, games, even social causes. In the 1980s and 90s, we deconstructed government into the commercial arena. The Thatcher Revolution, the Reagan Revolution, the Coal Revolution. Now there's only one arena left to be deconstructed, culture. Taking it and transforming it into cultural commerce. And my message is this, very important for this foundation with your work. Cultural diversity is like biodiversity. It can be used to exhaustion in the commercial arena. If it's packaged and resold and spent, you lose it. And when we lose cultural diversity, it is like losing biodiversity. If we lose a language, if we lose a culture, it's as final as losing a species and a habitat. And it's as devastating to the future of civilization. When we lose a language, we talked about this coming over in the automobile, when we lose a language, it's like dropping a bomb on the Louvre. I'm going to skip right to the end here because we're going to spend some time on Q&A. And I want to say in the last few minutes here, the big problem here is we have misunderstood first priorities. The big struggle in the 21st century is going to be between culture and commerce. Culture and commerce. If AOL, Time Warner, and Disney, and Vivendi, and Sony, they're European companies, Japanese companies, American companies, if they want content and they begin to strip all of the culture that you're involved with into paid-for activity, what are the consequences for civilization? Now, this is where I disagree with third-way politics. Mr. President Clinton, Prime Minister Blair, and Chancellor Schroeder. They believe third-way politics create a healthy global economy, and we create a healthy society and a healthy culture. They got it totally wrong. Totally wrong. They believe that material conditions are essential, and that from that, cultural context arises. They share common ground with both capitalist and socialist theoreticians. If you go back to the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, and then you read seriously Adam Smith and Ricardo, then read Marx and read Engels. They all shared common ground. They all believed that material conditions are primary. And they set the foundation for the kind of cultures that are built off of them. This is the experience of the post-Enlightenment era. Third-way politics is the most recent manifestation. Create a healthy global economy, and then we can give rise to social development and cultural development. My friends, I don't know of an example in history where people first create commerce and trade and then set up a culture. Do you? Do any of you? I don't know of an example in history where people first create a government, then create a culture. Do you? We've been laboring under this misconception that commerce is primary for too long. Commerce is a secondary institution. Government is a secondary institution. Commerce and government are derivative of culture. They're not the progenitors of culture. If we study cultural anthropology, we learn people first create language, metaphors for living, codes of social conduct, institutional ways of living in communities. Then when that social capital is well developed, then they set up trade. Then they have commerce. Then they create government. Third-way politics has it backwards. This is going to be very essential to understanding where we head in the academic community on studying these issues. Because for so long we have assumed that commerce is primary. Shame on us. You know where we learned in the business community that culture precedes commerce? When the Soviet Union collapsed. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Soviet Union for a long time deconstructed what was there of the civil society or the cultural sector. So by the time the Soviet Union collapsed, we rushed in to place businesses in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and Russia, and there wasn't enough cultural institutions still in place. You tried to make sure of anybody here that we did have culture in place, but there wasn't enough culture in place to maintain a trusting environment to set up commerce. Many of the businesses failed. What is culture? It's all the institutions, all the affiliations, formal and informal, that you and I have in our communities and country that are not commercially contracted or government services. Although you could make the case that even the derivative institutions are cultural. Now, how do we know culture precedes commerce? If everyone in this room woke up tomorrow morning and your entire culture of Italy collapsed, all the institutions, the affiliations, the metaphors, the understandings, the codes of behavior, all of the organizations that make up the culture, they all disappear tonight in Italy. Gone. How long do you think Italy would survive? A fortnight? But if you woke up tomorrow morning in Italy and your entire economy collapsed, your entire government collapsed, but your culture was still in place, you could remake those secondary institutions, couldn't you? That's how you know culture always precedes commerce. The capitalist theoreticians got it wrong. The socialist theoreticians got it wrong. The third way politicians have it wrong. This is essential because as the commercial arena attempts to deconstruct deep culture into paid-for entertainment, we suffer a big potential loss for civilization. The big battle here in Europe and in America, how do we maintain cultural diversity in all of its richness in the wake of globalization? We need an Aristotelian balance. I have no problems with global trade. I'm in favor of global trade and commerce. However, not at the expense of undermining local cultural identity and diversity. The balance to globalization, geography counts. Local cultural identity matters. We want both. Mahatma Gandhi put it well. He said, I want every idea in the world to flow through my house. Open the windows, open the doors. Just don't blow my house away. The big struggle politically is going to be this. How do we re-empower cultural diversity as an antidote to globalization? And how do we make sure we don't end up with cultural fundamentalism? This is the key. We need powerful local communities that understand that cultural diversity is their primary asset so they can have enough power to negotiate the terms with globalization. But there's a risk here. Two risks. In every community in Italy, government's less involved with your communities. Governments are shrinking. Who's going to fill the institutional leadership vacuum in every community with less government? In every community in Italy, commerce is less local and more global. I work with Italian companies that are in cyberspace now. They have almost no relationship to their local communities, some of them. Who fills the vacuum? There's going to be two struggles. One between the third sector and the fourth sector for control of your communities here in Italy. What is the fourth sector? The informal economy, the black market, the gangs, the criminals, the mob, organized crime. Take a look at what's happening in parts of Europe. Organized crime, the fourth sector, is filling that vacuum in the communities very quickly. There's a second battle within the civil society, within the culture, between the fundamentalists and the NGOs, the civil society organizations. Both believe in culture. Both believe in geography. Both believe in community. But here's the difference. The civil society organizations on the streets of Seattle, Washington, and Prague, they believe respect the diversity of cultures that make up civilization. The fundamentalists, the ethnic cleansing groups, the religious fanatic groups, the nationalist groups, they believe the only geography that counts is theirs. The only culture that matters is theirs. Everyone else is Satan. So we're going to have a struggle. The antidote to globalization, bring back strong, very developed, powerful local cultural diversity. The concern that in the name of bringing back culture, we don't end up with either fundamentalism or with the mob and criminal activity. A great, great battle. Let me end with this thought. And we'll talk about education and other things during the Q&A, but let me end with this thought. In some ways, interesting enough, I think Italy could be the model here. And I don't say that because I'm in Italy. I've been saying that Italy could be the model to American business leaders, American politicians. Why? Italy interests me. You all interest me because look at this country. You began modern commerce in the Renaissance. You began the whole experiment in modern mercantilist commerce right here in places like Milan. What did you do? You took marquetry and furniture making in Florence. You took silk and cloth in Milano. You took ceramics in Gubbio and Perugia. You took glass blowing in Venice and Murano. What did you do? These were cultural crafts. You moved them into the commercial arena in the Renaissance. You traded them to the world. You shared your culture as a commercial proposition, correct? Now let's look at Italy today, the year 2000. You are the 5th largest economic power in the world. Your culture is still strong, is it not? Now, Italian culture today is not what it was 20 years ago. The thing that's interesting about Italian culture is you're not defensive. The French understand that culture counts, but they're very defensive about their culture. I've never seen an Italian, correct me if I'm wrong, that's defensive about your culture. You borrow from other cultures, you exchange your culture as if it's gifts. You don't see your culture as something to protect and defend, but something to exchange as a gift with others and to borrow others' gifts back to you. The reason your culture is so strong, even though it's always changing and growing, is because you like to exchange gifts with other cultures and borrow, change. Now, I have never met an Italian. I have never met an Italian, from CEO to factory worker, who didn't believe the following. You tell me if I'm wrong. Here's the following. Your cultural identity always precedes your commercial identity here in Italy. You believe that commerce is essential to your lives, essential, but not sufficient to define who you are. You never bought the idea that material conditions are primary. Maintaining that balance between cultural identity and commercial identity is going to be the key to whether these new technologies, this globalization, becomes a success and a renaissance, or a deep, deep period of social upheaval. So my hope, all the professors here, business people, don't know if we have anyone here from organized labor, but especially you in the academic community, we have a big responsibility. We need to frame the appropriate questions here. We need to understand the commercial context that's emerging. We have to be courageous enough to clean house instead of thinking of old categories and continuing to justify and support old belief patterns. Just take an experiential look at what's happening here and ask some basic Socratic questions. The why of this. And if we can keep first principles in place and understand cultural diversity is the greatest single asset of the human race, a gift to share, not a possession to defend, we can make this e-commerce revolution, this shift to networks and globalization, a leap forward in the 21st century. Thank you.
Ringraziamo quindi Jeremy Rifkin per questa esposizione che si situa proprio l'esposizione. No, non ha problemi. Dunque, l'esposizione di Jeremy Rifkin si situa proprio nell'essenziale del dibattito che da 30 anni noi stiamo conducendo, esattamente fra New York, Tokyo, Gerusalemme e ciascuna città europea, Caracas, poi la Russia,